world-famous athlete, a high-stakes meeting, and one moment at an airport that would change everything. When Shaquille, one of basketball's biggest stars, was stopped by security for no clear reason, it didn't just shake his morning plans. It shifted his entire life. That single incident lit a fire that turned him into a powerful voice against discrimination. But can one man's courage truly challenge a system built on bias? And what if that spark could light the way for those who've been ignored for far too long? This isn't just a celebrity story. This is about how standing up, even when it's uncomfortable, can echo far beyond one person. Ready to hear what really happened? It was a clear Tuesday morning. Shaquille rolled into Maplewood International Airport's private aviation terminal in his polished black Mercedes. The spring sun bounced off the hood like he was arriving on a movie set, but for him, this was just another workday. At 30 years old, Shaquille was at the height of his game. One of the most respected players in the league. That morning, he had an important endorsement meeting in Boston, and a private jet was waiting to take him there. He checked his watch, 8:30 a.m., plenty of time before his 9 a.m. departure. One glance in the rearview mirror, suit crisp, fade fresh, posture calm. He adjusted his jacket, made sure his watch sat just right on his wrist. Looking sharp wasn't about ego, it was part of his discipline. Stepping out, he grabbed his leather duffel in one hand, documents, personal items, and slung his designer backpack over the other shoulder. Passport, flight papers, all ready. His sneakers squeaked lightly on the pavement as he walked toward the terminal. This wasn't a chaotic main airport. It was quiet, clean, exclusive, floor-to-ceiling glass, modern architecture, expensive cars lined up nearby. Business travelers chatted quietly near the entrance. A jet lifted off in the distance. Another day, another flight. As he neared the door, Shaquille noticed a security guard. Middle-aged, white, graying hair. Name tag, Ethan Rogers. Nothing unusual, Shaq had passed through dozens of private terminals before. This was routine. He reached into his bag and prepped everything: ID, player credentials, flight papers, license. He believed in being organized, it made things smooth. The air was fresh. Birds chirped. Planes rumbled softly in the background. He was a few steps from the door. Jet on standby. Meeting in Boston running through his head. Everything aligned. One last message to his assistant, confirming his afternoon had been cleared. Classic Shaquille, no loose ends. Just focus, preparation, and precision. But then, just as he reached the terminal entrance, the air shifted. Security guard Ethan Rogers stepped directly into his path. His posture changed. His tone shifted. What had started as an ordinary morning, just a man on his way to a meeting, suddenly felt tense. In the next few seconds, everything would flip. Not just for Shaquille, but for an entire conversation about race, status, and the quiet bias that hides behind uniforms and protocols. Because what happened next wasn't just about airport security. It became the beginning of something bigger. He raised his hand in a firm stop, even though Shaquille had already slowed down, holding out his documents. "Excuse me, sir," the guard barked, loud enough to echo through the quiet terminal. "You need to head to the main terminal. This area's for private aviation only." He didn't even glance at the documents in Shaquille's hand. Remaining calm and professional, Shaquille replied, "Good morning, sir. I have my paperwork right here. I'm scheduled for the 9 a.m. flight to Boston." He stepped forward slightly, offering the documents, but the guard, Ethan Rogers, stepped back, refusing to even touch them. "I've been working here for 15 years, Rogers said, crossing his arms, his tone sharp. "I know who belongs here, and who doesn't." His eyes scanned Shaquille's designer suit and high-end sneakers, loaded with silent judgment. At that moment, two businessmen entered through a separate door. Rogers didn't even glance at them, let alone check their documents. Shaquille noticed. He took a quiet breath. He'd faced this kind of situation before. It never got easier. Sir, I respect your position, Shaquille said evenly, but I'm a professional athlete heading to a business meeting in Boston. Here's my ID, my credentials, and my flight documentation. Rogers let out a short, mocking laugh, the kind that turns heads. Right, he scoffed. And I'm the President of the United States. Then, louder, I'm trying to be nice here, but you need to leave. The main terminal is that way. He pointed across the property, toward the regular airport, almost a mile away. A few onlookers had begun to gather. Some were already filming on their phones. Others whispered. Through the large windows, Shaquille could clearly see his private jet waiting on the tarmac. He checked his watch. 8:40 a.m. Mr. Rogers, Shaquille said, reading the guard's name tag. I'm asking you one more time, please, check my documentation. My meeting is time sensitive, and this delay is unnecessary. His voice stayed steady, but his heart rate was up now. Rogers' face flushed. Now you're telling me how to do my job, he snapped. If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the police. He reached for his radio, slowly, deliberately, putting on a show. Just then, a white couple approached the same entrance. No documents in hand. Rogers smiled brightly and waved them through. Good morning, folks. Have a nice flight. The couple glanced uncomfortably between Rogers and Shaquille as they walked past. Shaquille looked him in the eye. So you let them through without checking anything, but you won't even look at my documents? He pulled out his phone and hit record. Is there something specific about me that makes you think I don't belong here? Rogers turned redder. Are you accusing me of something? He snapped. That's it. I'm calling security. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted his radio. More people stopped to watch. A young woman in the crowd spoke up. This isn't right. He's just trying to show his documents. But Rogers ignored her. Shaquille remained calm. Years of high-pressure games had trained him well. He noticed a pilot in uniform nearby, watching with concern. Other travelers had their phones out, recording every second. Mr. Rogers, Shaquille said again, voice firm but respectful. I don't want trouble. I just want to board my flight. My meeting in Boston can't wait. Please, just check my documents. But Rogers raised his voice louder, speaking over him. Security's on the way, he declared. And you can stop with this whole athlete story. No one's buying it. He physically stepped in front of Shaquille, blocking his view of the jet, a final show of dominance. What Rogers didn't know was that Shaquille had already sent a quick text to his charter company manager. He also had the airport's security operations number saved, a precaution he'd taken long ago for exactly this kind of moment. As Rogers continued his power play, Shaquille quietly pressed call. The crowd was growing. The whispers were louder. Sunlight poured in through the windows, illuminating the scene like a spotlight. And just then, a young man in a gray suit stepped forward. Sir, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I've seen Shaquille on TV. He's a real basketball player. Rogers waved him off furiously. Everyone needs to mind their own business, he barked, voice cracking under pressure. This is a security matter. I'm handling it. His voice rang through the terminal like a warning bell, but the crowd wasn't buying it anymore. They were witnessing something else entirely. Another couple approached the entrance, dressed casually, dragging expensive golf bags behind them. And just like that, Rogers changed. His entire posture shifted. He beamed with a wide smile and rushed to open the door for them. Welcome to the private terminal. Headed out for a golf trip, he asked, voice suddenly light and cheerful. Shaquille stood silently, still holding his phone up, still recording. Mr. Rogers, he said steadily, in the last 10 minutes, you've let 6 people through without checking a single document. I'm the only one you've stopped. Would you like to explain why? Rogers spun around, his face twisting in frustration. That's it. "You're trespassing and harassing me now," he shouted, grabbing his radio with shaky hands. "Security, we've got a situation at the private terminal entrance." People in the crowd exchanged glances. More had gathered. A flight attendant from another jet paused mid-shift to watch, whispering something to her pilot. He immediately took out his phone and started making calls. "My flight leaves in 15 minutes, Shaquille said calmly. "There's a meeting waiting for me in Boston. Every minute you delay me puts that at risk." He held up his player credentials again, higher this time. But Rogers turned his back. An older woman in the crowd raised her voice. "This is disgraceful. He's shown you every possible document. What more do you want?" Others nodded, murmuring in agreement. But Rogers wasn't backing down. His face now flushed deep purple. He shouted, "All of you are interfering with official security procedures. If you don't clear this area right now, you'll all be dealing with the police." Shaquille glanced at his phone. His message to the charter company had been read. The airport security operations center was still on the line, quietly listening. Help was coming. He just needed to stay calm a little longer. From the edge of the crowd, a teenage girl whispered, "This is going viral already," as she live-streamed the scene. "Over 1,000 people are watching right now." Rogers heard her and seemed to panic. "You can't film me," he shouted, lunging forward to block the camera. "This is a restricted area, no videos allowed." But it was too late. Dozens of phones were pointed straight at him. Through the glass, Shaquille spotted his pilot watching the situation unfold. The ground crew had stopped moving. Everyone had their eyes fixed on the entrance. "Mr. Rogers," Shaquille said one last time, his voice unwavering, "I understand you're upset. But I have every right to be here. I'm asking, again, professionally, check my documents and allow me to board my flight." Rogers pointed at him, shaking with rage. "You think you're smart? You think all these people filming are going to help you? I've worked here for 15 years. I know who belongs here and who doesn't." And just as those last words left his mouth, the terminal doors behind him slid open. He didn't notice, but everyone else did. Silence fell across the terminal as 3 people stepped through the entrance: the head of airport security, the charter company's representative, and the general manager of the terminal. Their faces said it all. They'd heard everything. Rogers, still facing Shaquille, had no idea his supervisors were standing directly behind him. The sun poured in through the glass, casting the scene in bright, uncomfortable clarity. His radio crackled softly, but he wasn't listening. Then, a voice broke the silence. "Mr. Rogers," said the head of security, her voice sharp and unmistakable. "Step away from Mr. O'Neill." Immediately, Rogers spun around, and the color drained from his face. His mouth opened, then closed. No words. The woman, Mrs. Stevens, was tall, dressed in a crisp black suit, and wore a badge that clearly outranked his. She didn't blink. The charter rep, Robert Davis, quickly moved to Shaquille's side. "Shaquille, I'm so sorry this happened. We've worked with you for years. This is completely unacceptable." He was already scrolling through a tablet, pulling up Shaquille's flight history. Then came the terminal manager, Alan Roberts. "Mr. Rogers," he said flatly, "hand over your badge." "Now." The crowd watched in total silence as Rogers' hands trembled, slowly unpinning his security badge. His face was blank now. He didn't even argue. Shaquille stayed composed, though inside, he felt the weight lift off his chest. He turned to Mrs. Stevens and calmly handed her his documents. "I've been trying to show these to Mr. Rogers for the last 20 minutes. Mrs. Stevens reviewed the papers quickly, flight manifest, credentials, everything in order. She nodded. "Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. You're clear to board." Mrs. Stevens looked over the documents, then raised her voice so everyone could hear. "Everything is in perfect order, exactly what we'd expect from one of our regular charter passengers," she announced clearly. Then she turned sharply to Rogers, who was now visibly sweating. "Would you like to explain why you refused to even look at these documents?" Rogers stammered, I was just following protocol, you see." But his words faded mid-sentence. Even he could hear how hollow they sounded. The crowd stayed silent, phone still recording. From the side, the teenage girl live streaming the whole thing spoke again. "We're at over 10,000 live viewers now. People are furious." Rogers shrank a little more. Mr. Roberts, the terminal manager, was now reviewing security camera footage on his tablet. In the past hour alone, he said grimly, Rogers let 23 passengers walk through without checking any documentation. Shaquille was the only one stopped. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Stevens turned to address everyone. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Maplewood International Airport, I want to sincerely apologize. What you've witnessed is not what we stand for." Then she turned to Shaquille. "We'll have you on your way to Boston immediately." At that moment, 2 security officers arrived and quietly approached Rogers. As they led him toward the office, he looked around in disbelief, like he still hadn't realized his power had vanished. The crowd parted. Cameras stayed up. Mr. Davis from the charter company was already dialing. "I'm having the pilot start the engines now, Shaquille. You'll be in the air in 10 minutes, he said, gesturing toward a VIP staffer who arrived to take Shaquille's bags. The businessman who had spoken up earlier approached. "My wife's a huge fan," he said with a small smile. "I recorded everything. If your lawyers need a copy, it's yours." Shaquille nodded politely, then turned to Mrs. Stevens. "I don't want anyone to lose their job," he said quietly. "But I do want to make sure this never happens to anyone else." Mrs. Stevens met his eyes and nodded, serious. "Oh, trust me, Shaquille, there will be changes. We've needed to overhaul our training for a long time. This just proved we can't wait any longer." As the crowd began to disperse, many stopped to shake Shaquille's hand or offer support. The flight attendant who had watched it all unfold handed him a business card. "I've seen things like this before," she said softly. "But I was too scared to speak up. If you want my statement, I'll give it." A golf cart pulled up at the curb. As Shaquille climbed in, he glanced toward the security office window. Rogers sat alone inside, his head in his hands. The sun was high now. The meeting in Boston would happen after all, but what started as a delay had turned into something much bigger. As the cart rolled across the tarmac toward his jet, Shaquille noticed news vans pulling into the parking lot. Reporters were already setting up. The videos had gone viral. This story was no longer just his. As the private jet lifted off from Maplewood International, the footage from the terminal was spreading like wildfire across social media. Inside the cabin, Shaquille finally exhaled. He leaned back in the leather seat, trying to process what had just happened. The flight attendant, Lisa, approached with a cup of hot tea. "Shaquille," she said gently, "I just checked my phone. You're trending on Twitter and Facebook. People are calling you a hero for how calmly you handled it." She showed him the screen, over 1 million views and counting. Back at the terminal, the media frenzy had begun. CNN, Fox, ABC, reporters in brightly colored jackets stood outside the private terminal, broadcasting live updates as the morning sunlight poured across the scene. Inside the security office, James Rogers sat in a small room with Mrs. Stevens and 2 other officials. His face was no longer red with anger, now it was pale with dread. Behind him, security footage played on loop. One clip after another showed him waving white passengers through without a glance, while stopping and interrogating black passengers, including Shaquille. Mrs. Stevens read aloud from her report. "In the last hour, you failed to check identification for any white passengers, but stopped 3 black passengers, including Mr. O'Neill." She looked up. "Would you like to explain that pattern?" Rogers didn't respond. He stared at his hands, his voice barely a whisper. "I was just trying to maintain security." But he didn't even sound convinced himself. The evidence spoke louder. Elsewhere in the terminal, Mr. Roberts was flooded with calls. The airport's social media team reported a tidal wave of posts, not just about this incident, but from travelers across the country sharing their stories of discrimination at airports. Civil rights organizations had started reaching out. News networks wanted interviews. The story had become a national headline. Back on the plane, Shaquille kept his phone on silent. He needed to focus on reviewing notes for his meeting in Boston, but he couldn't ignore the flood of support pouring in. Messages from teammates lit up his screen. "You handled that like a champ. Your patience was powerful, man. Respect." And back in Maplewood, change was already in motion. Back at Maplewood International, an emergency staff meeting was already underway. "From today forward, we're changing our protocols," announced Mr. Davis, standing at the front of the room. "Every VIP passenger will receive a digital ID card with a verified photo. No more assumptions. No more discrimination based on appearance." The team nodded, shaken but motivated. Change was no longer optional, it was overdue. Meanwhile, just outside, the teenage girl who had live-streamed the entire incident, Jenny Martinez, was being interviewed by a local news crew. "I just knew I had to record it," she said, standing in front of the terminal. Shaquille was so calm and professional. And that guard, he was clearly in the wrong. People need to see that this still happens, even in places like this. Inside the airport's executive offices, the leadership team had gathered for an urgent meeting. The CEO appeared on a large video screen, his face grim. "This isn't just about one guard," he said. "We need to review our entire approach to security. Training, oversight, accountability, all of it." Mrs. Stevens stepped forward, holding a thick folder. "These are complaints filed against Rogers over the past year," she said. "Most were ignored. Many dismissed without proper review. We found 12 similar incidents. Every one involved a person of color being stopped without cause." No one in the room spoke. The silence said everything. Out in the terminal, travelers paused in front of the televisions. News stations were playing split-screen coverage, security footage from different angles, showing Shaquille's calm, respectful behavior contrasted against Rogers' increasingly hostile actions. Captions scrolled across the bottom of the screen: "Discrimination in private aviation." "Shaquille O'Neal incident sparks national outrage." Up in the sky, the pilot's voice came through the intercom. "We're making good time to Boston, should land about 20 minutes ahead of schedule. We're making up for the delay." He smiled quietly in the cockpit, proud that the meeting Shaquille fought so hard to reach would still happen on time. In the cabin, the flight attendant brought over Shaquille's laptop. "The Wi-Fi's ready if you need it," she said, then hesitated for a second. "Also, my son's a huge fan. He wants to be a professional basketball player. He's been watching you for years." She smiled, a little emotional. "Thank you for showing him what grace looks like in tough situations." Shaquille gave a small nod. "Tell him to keep working hard. And always stay focused." As the jet cruised at 30,000 feet, the world below kept spinning. Hashtags like #FlyWithRespect, #ShaquilleSpeaks, and #StopAirportBias were trending across social media. Civil rights attorneys were contacting the airport. Journalists were digging deeper. Other travelers began sharing their own stories that had gone ignored for far too long. What started as one athlete's morning flight had turned into a national conversation about dignity, power, and the quiet biases still hiding in plain sight. But for Shaquille, one thing remained clear: he still had a job to do. He opened his laptop, pulled up his presentation, and focused on what he came to do. Because no matter how high the stakes, he never let anything, not even injustice, knock him off his game. Shaquille knew the incident at Maplewood would have lasting effects. But right now, his focus was clear: he had a career to secure. The very next morning, exactly 24 hours after the confrontation, Maplewood International was buzzing with media and urgency. At 9 a.m. sharp, the airport held a major press conference. Cameras clicked. Reporters filled every seat. At the podium stood the airport's CEO, Mr. Richard Wilson, with Mrs. Stevens, Mr. Roberts, and board members behind him. Large screens showed clips from the now viral video, over 50 million views and counting. First, Wilson began, "I want to publicly apologize to Shaquille O'Neal. What happened yesterday was unacceptable. And today, we're announcing immediate changes to our security protocols." While the world watched, Shaquille walked out of his Boston hotel, fresh from a successful meeting. Business executives stopped to shake his hand, take selfies, and offer support. One young athlete called out, eyes filled with emotion, "Thank you for showing us how to handle discrimination with dignity. I've been afraid to speak up, but you gave me courage." Back at Maplewood, news stations uncovered Rogers' history. 5 employees had come forward, saying they'd reported him for discriminatory behavior, but their complaints were buried by past management. Mrs. Stevens sat at her desk, scrolling through hundreds of emails from airports across the U.S. "We can't hide from this anymore," she told her team. "It's time for real change." Downstairs, workers were installing new cameras and updating check-in systems. New signs explained passenger rights and outlined fare security procedures. Every guard now wore a body camera. Jenny Martinez, the teenage girl whose live stream ignited the internet, was appearing on talk shows across the country. "I just did what was right," she told one reporter. Shaquille stayed so calm. People needed to see that this still happens. Shaquille's phone buzzed nonstop. Major networks called, but he only accepted one interview with a sports journal to speak about discrimination in athletics and aviation. In the security office, all guards were now attending mandatory bias training. A diversity expert played the video. "This is what discrimination looks like," she said. "And this is why we change." Social media exploded. Hashtag Shaquille Standards was trending worldwide. Celebrities, politicians, and athletes shared the footage. Civil rights groups launched new airport equity initiatives. Rogers was fired. An investigation revealed a clear pattern of profiling. When he tried to defend himself on TV, his excuses fell flat. "I was just doing my job," he said, but the video said otherwise. Shaquille's charter company acted fast. A new VIP app with digital IDs and pre-clearance was launched. "We want every passenger to feel safe and respected," Mr. Davis announced. Minority bookings rose by 50% in a week. Maplewood's board approved a $1 million budget for equipment and training. Other airports started calling, asking for help. As the sun set, Shaquille sat in his Boston hotel, his face quietly lit by the glow of news coverage. But instead of watching, he turned back to his files. He had more meetings tomorrow. His career and this cause were both just getting started. A week later, in his office, Shaquille looked at a neat stack of letters, hundreds of messages from people across the country. His assistant, Jenny, peeked in. "CNN's here," she said softly. "Your first official interview." Shaquille had waited. He didn't want to speak too soon. He wanted to make sure it counted. Reporter Maria Santos sat up in front of his wall of trophies. "Your video has now been viewed over 100 million times," she began. "How does it feel to become a symbol of standing against discrimination?" Shaquille paused. "This isn't about me," he said. "It's about a system that needs to change." He held up a letter from a young boy. "This shows what happened to me wasn't unique." Meanwhile, at Maplewood, security guards now worked in pairs, always from different backgrounds. ID scanners replaced judgment calls. Signs in multiple languages outlined rights for all. Mrs. Stevens hosted airport leaders from across the country. "What happened here forced us to face reality," she said. "Now, we're fixing it." Even Rogers' story changed. He began working with an anti-bias training group. "I was the example of what not to do," he told new officers. My bias almost destroyed someone's life. Jenny Martinez started a movement, Record for Rights, helping people safely document discrimination. With chapters in 50 cities, she became a national voice for change. Shaquille's basketball career thrived. Endorsements rolled in. His team launched diversity programs inspired by his example. Young players now saw him as more than an athlete, he was a blueprint for strength through grace. At a national aviation conference in Washington, D.C., 3 months later, Shaquille stood on stage beside Mrs. Stevens. Behind them, a massive screen showed the numbers. Discrimination complaints had dropped by 80% at airports adopting the new procedures, now known as the Shaquille Standards. This all began, Mrs. Stevens said, because one man refused to be disrespected. In the crowd sat airport executives, civil rights leaders, and even Rogers, now training others on what bias looks like and how to stop it. Back at Maplewood, the private terminal looked entirely different. 2 guards at every post. Digital ID scanners. Clear signage. A new culture. In a TV interview, Jenny said, Shaquille showed us that professionalism and documentation can lead to real change. At the end of the conference, Shaquille received a national award for leadership in aviation safety and equality. But instead of standing alone, he invited 50 others to join him, people who had also faced discrimination and helped create change. This was never about one moment or one person, he said. It's about building a future where everyone is treated with respect. The room rose in a standing ovation. Outside, the sun set behind the Washington Monument. Inside, the world had just witnessed how one moment of quiet strength, one calm refusal to be dismissed, could reshape an entire system. The Shaquille Standards were no longer just policies. They were the future.